talk about the current impact on this year's winter on the deer herd, specifically for northeastern Wisconsin, since it's where
Sure.
most people will be
Yep.
seeing it.
Yeah. So when we talk about white-tailed deer in winter, it's on people's minds now because we've had a pretty stiff winter for the past 5 weeks or so. And we track winter's impact on white-tailed deer through what we call the Winter Severity Index. It's something we've been doing for decades, so it's nice we have a long data set. And it's simply a very basic tracking of giving each day of the winter a point if the temperature drops below zero or if the snow depth is 18 inches or greater. And so from Green Bay south, it's very rare for that winter severity index to get to a point where it's going to have a negative impact on deer. It can happen, doesn't happen very often. So when we're thinking about winter severity index, we're really talking about the northern half, especially the northern third of the state.
Mm-hmm. So are you guys, is this index kind of broken into different sections across the state based on where your offices are, or how do you get these numbers together?
So we've got field points out scattered across all of our counties in the northern half of the state. And so that point is visited daily to get the snow depth. And temperature these days we can get from all kinds of weather service tracking data. We can go back into databases to look at at any point contact that's close by where our stations are. So temperature we tend to get through weather service databases, but we're out at the sites measuring snow depth on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. So what are the different levels of this winter severity index? You mentioned we're kind of a moderate category right now. Is it a 3-point different thing, or is it 5? How many different levels?
So basically it's broken down so that we've got pretty simple numbers to remember, that anything below 50 is considered mild, 50 to 80 would be considered a moderate winter, 80 to 100 is severe, and when we get over 100, then we're talking about a very severe winter with predictable or negative impacts on deer populations. For example, back in the winter, most people will remember in 2013-14, we went significantly over 100 in the winter severity index in the northern forest, and there were certainly measurable impacts on the deer population. But since then, we've been in the mild category for the past 3 winters, and so now we've entered into moderate in the northern third of the state, basically, as of right now. So the real question is what will happen for the rest of March. I mean, if it warms up at the end of this week and winter breaks, and we don't get any more below zero weather, we won't be accumulating any more points. Snow depth is significant in the northern tier counties and even in Door County. So it's going to take a little while for that snow to drop down below 18 inches, so we can anticipate accumulating additional snow depth points into the coming weeks at least.
Mm-hmm. What plays a bigger concern for you guys, the temperature below zero or a consistent snow depth over 18?
It's so variable. The real issue is the longevity of these conditions. We've had some really severe conditions in bursts over the course of late January and February with really cold conditions. And people, wonder, is a 0 day the same as 30 below zero, or should you get more points? Again, the system has been working for us quite well for decades in predicting impacts, and so we don't try to tweak it to suggest that a really, really cold day. Again, the biggest issue is that the deer are biologically conditioned to make it through a winter by basically almost going into a coast mode with their metabolism. I mean, they're still going to eat, but their digestive system converts away from high energy food to low energy food like browse, twigs and pine needles and cedar.
What are they eating right
now? Their primary food sources are browse, which is the tips of twigs of trees and brush, and that's what's accessible, and that's a normal process for them to go through. That food source isn't going to provide the energy and the calories. The interesting thing is that people's response is if they think deer are entering now into a stressful period and we should do something to interject by providing better food, that may not make a difference because the deer's digestive system switches over to where it can't really efficiently process high energy food. For example, if they were to be introduced to corn at this point, if they haven't been eating corn for the last couple of months, they probably can't digest that corn properly. They'll eat it. They can actually get themselves into trouble if they're exposed to a high energy food source now if they hadn't had it, for throughout the winter. But they are designed to be able to just, like I said, coast from here till March. So that's where the question is, if winter breaks, they'll be able to get by on their reserves. If winter stretches into into April, and then like we had last year, we had a real severe storm in April. But that was on the back end of a very mild winter. We probably saw some impacts, but they were minor. This year, if it stretches out into April, more deer are going to have run out of reserves, and so we'll potentially see some more losses. We're not seeing measurable losses now at this point, so it's really a question of what happens over the next month.
Sure. You mentioned people like feeding deer corn and different stuff. I'm sure people would probably want to do that, especially with all the snow. They think, oh, these deer need to eat. But how does that play? Is that playing a role with like the CWD and stuff? Where can we be feeding?
Right.
Is Brown County one of those counties where you can't be feeding?
So no. So it does. Again, that is a good thing to remind people is that we have baiting and feeding or restrictions that do not allow artificial feeding of deer in 40-some counties in the state. So. In northeast Wisconsin here, it's a mixture of which counties can and can't be fed. And you could go onto our website, type in the search box feeding or baiting, and pull up the map that tells you if your county, you can or can't. And even if you can, there are restrictions that play into the amount and where you put it. And we also have a specific guide on winter feeding and the do's and don'ts that we would steer people towards on our website.
Okay. I think that's really important because I'm sure people, like
Yep.
I said, want to feed and where can't you, where can't you?
Yep.
But obviously CWD is such a huge topic
Right, yeah. It's a natural reaction, human compassion and the interest in wanting to be involved. But depending on the county that you're in, again, it might not be helping the situation if deer run into trouble, in March. It's really a measure of how many deer are on the landscape in the first place relative to the habitat and the ability for that landscape, to support them. The fix, in other words, isn't something that we do now for the immediate challenge. This issue is something that you think about last fall or last year, and how it plays out from here on out, again, is really more up to Mother Nature than what we can do about it at this point in time. And again, we're certainly not at a point to have to press the button that there's a big problem out there. That could be the case a month from now, but again, right now we're in the moderate category, and whether or not we get to severe is going to really depend on what happens over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that 13-14 year again too. There was a huge loss of a herd, especially up north, correct?
Yeah. Well, so
how we recovered
sure,
since then? Sure.
So a couple of lessons from 2013-14 is, so in general, if we do get into a situation where animals are going to perish, a large portion of that is going to be the fawns from last year. They're the smallest in body weight. They go into winter with the biggest challenge, so to speak. And so the most likely thing is you could lose last year's production. The last animals to perish are the adult does, and actually they very seldom succumb to winter. We've got some deer survival research over the past decade in different parts of Wisconsin, up in Sawyer County. We're doing it now down in the southwest part of the state where we had radio-collared deer. Back in that period of time in 2013 and 14, almost no adult does perished in that winter. So they are conditioned to go into the winter with high body fat reserves, and again, they can coast quite well through even the most severe winters. So the good news for the deer population is they will still be there in the spring to replenish, losses, and that almost always happens. So although the deer population as a whole got knocked down somewhat that year, then with mild conditions, they were able to recover, pretty steadily But you never know. If you get 2 bad winters in a row, that might just take that much longer. But because we've had mild winters the past couple of years, the population right now is pretty robust. Certainly we would expect it to weather what they're dealing with at this point, quite well. There no doubt will be some fawn losses, but to the extent that it's significant is yet to be determined.
Mm-hmm. The meteorologist in me had me curious about this. Since you started this index, have you seen a change in the numbers and how severe our winters have been getting from 50 years ago to now?
Yeah. So if you look
What kind of
back,
trend are you saying?
sure. So most people that have been around long enough to remember the 1970s, where we had severe winter after severe winter after severe winter, that had a measurable negative impact on the deer population. But then in the 1980s, we went into a period of mild winters strung in a row that we've never had seen prior to that. That allowed the deer population to grow to unprecedented numbers. And then we've had these severe winters kind of pop in periodically, but we've had several groups of mild winters in a row. It happened in the 80s, it happened in the late 90s. And then in the early 2000s, it was a little bit more back and forth, but now again, we're coming off of a string of 3 really mild winters, and we saw the deer population responding to that. Now we're back to more, whether you call it, there's never really a normal winter, is there?
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just kind of curious how things have been kind of changing. So, is there anything else you'd like to add that may not have hit on?
Yeah, not really. I mean, the main point is that we will continue to track the number through the month of March and through April. And then in April, each county has a deer advisory council that will be meeting here in the middle of March and then again in the middle of April to set the stage for this fall's deer hunting season. So we certainly will be tracking winter severity index, and that will be part of the conversation again in the northern part of the state. And there's plenty to discuss, but when we gather in April, we'll have a much better sense of how this is going to play out for 2019 and making adjustments that will then impact our deer season frameworks this fall.
Sure, and just a reminder, it was low, moderate, high, and severe?
Right, yeah. So mild is anything below a 50. And so, for example, we are in Door County and just north of Green Bay, we're in the 30s right now. If you get south of here, we're only in the teens. So those counties will likely not even get into the moderate category. But when you get to northern Oconto and Marinette, and then across the state from there, they're in the low 50s right now. So they're in the moderate already, and in 20 to 25 more points, they're going to reach severe. And so that's very possible in some of those northern counties.
Yeah. I know Rhinelander, where I came from, they got like 40 some.
Oh yeah,
50 some inches of snow. It's
yeah.
ridiculous. I mean, a lot of it just this month too.
Yeah, so they're definitely gonna continue to get at least 1 point a day for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, no kidding.